And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Well, thanks very much for tuning in, and welcome to another episode of the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Thrilled to have on the program this week a veteran broadcaster who entertained the folks in Toronto for nearly 2 decades at the iconic CHUM-FM radio station before he moved into a dual position with the CHUM Group as both management and on air. He currently works for Bayshore Broadcasting. He's also an actor, and perhaps more importantly, he's a Green Bay Packer fan. Rick Ringer, how are you?
Good, Ted. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks very much for asking. It's good to see you. It's good to have you here. It's nice chatting with you. You know, I mean, I feel like I've known you for years and years and years, and in reality, we just kind of bumped into each other, and because we always sort of worked on opposite sides of the street, as it were.
That's right. Yes.
In the day.
Yeah.
But it's strange, and I mentioned this once to another person that I interviewed from the industry, one of our colleagues, our contemporaries, and I said it's like, you know, at one point, you know, those who used to be your enemies are now your like close friends.
Yeah. You know, the competitiveness of the radio game in Toronto back in the day, especially, I mean, when you guys signed Q107 on, that was just like, well, look how we've got real competition here. And yeah, you know, the whole thing with Chum Busters and all that in later days and everything, you know, it was hard not to take it personally, but at the same time, you know, it's what made it what it was, that sense of competition, just like CFTR and 1050 Chum and the rivalry that they had. I mean, it was great for radio listeners, you know, and then when CFNY came on the air, especially. So, yeah,
it's true. And I don't know if that, because I'm not into that, you know, into that culture, as it were, at this point. And I don't know whether that kind of rivalry exists the way it did back then. I mean, surely everybody wants to beat the next guy.
Sure, you want to have better ratings than the other guy, you know.
Just how it began for you stateside. You're not from here. Here.
Well, where's here?
Well, the 51st state. From Canada. Where are you? You were born?
I grew up in a town about the size of Peterborough called Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is about 100 miles east of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Mm-hmm. So on the west central side of the state, as opposed to closer to Green Bay or down to Milwaukee or whatever. So, yeah, I grew up there and was doing radio. I started doing radio when I was still in high school. Got lucky enough to get a job, you know, pushing buttons and doing one all-night show a week on the weekend. And then it grew from there, 4.5 years there, as well as going to university for a few years and getting a couple years worth of credit because I was already working in radio at the same time. And then sent off a tape to a bunch of places. I was ideally looking to find somewhere to work where it was warm, you know, like sending tapes off to Florida and Arizona and places like that. And then I saw this ad in Billboard magazine that they were looking for somebody at CHUM-FM. And I had not heard of the radio station. I was not familiar with Canada as a country or Toronto as a city at all, but I sent it off and lo and behold, I got hired. So
you're 18 years of age when you start working in radio. And at that point, do you have any idea what it is that you foresee yourself doing down the road? Like, did you think to yourself, okay, well, I want to be like a top 40 jock, because you ended up at CHUM-FM, which is hardly wasn't top 40 at all. I mean,
it was the exact opposite. Yeah, I didn't at that point. I did admire greatly the guys across the hall at 1050 Chum.
Yeah.
They had the operators. And they were just, because I grew up listening to WLS in Chicago.
Right.
At night. And so that was my inspiration, but that wasn't necessarily the direction I wanted to take. And my early radio career in Eau Claire reflected more the idea of what CHUM-FM was. I did an all-night free form show. I did a split shift actually before I came to Toronto. I was on the air doing kind of a top 40 thing for a couple of hours in the evening around supper time. And then I would go home and then come back into the station at midnight and do a free form progressive show, playing album sides and all that kind of stuff. But that was really more along the lines of what I saw myself as being. I mean, I was a long-haired hippie and was into music in a big way, and learned so much more about music and the depth of music once I got to CHUM-FM, even though they were already starting to format things a little bit at that point.
Because I found it when I went to Seneca College here in Toronto and took an applied communications course. And we're going to talk about that because you taught not there, but you taught in college, and those courses are disappearing. But again, we'll get into that a little later. And I found that there were sort of two types of people who wanted to get into radio. They were the ones either they wanted to amass 10,000 albums by the time they hit 30 that have their own possession that they got for free from record companies, or there were people like me who just wanted to go in the air and goof around and enjoyed the music at the same time. So it was kind of like a one or the other,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was probably more the former.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know what? I was always kind of a take it as it comes sort of guy. I mean, I didn't even really want to do radio when I was young. I wanted to be an airline pilot. And at one point I had applied to the U.S. Air Force Academy to try and get in there to become one, and then pulled myself out of the competition for a spot because it didn't feel right, which was a really ambiguous thing to tell my father, who was an Air Force veteran. Yeah, Dad, I've changed my mind. I don't want to go to the academy. Well, why not? It was difficult to explain, but there was a creative side in me, I think, that was just starting to come out in high school. And as a result, both between radio and being a theater major in university as well, I was able to unleash that creativity, I guess you'd say, and kind of find my true self, and then I thought, okay, well, am I going to try and make it as an actor or as a radio guy? And I thought I had a better shot as a radio at a larger market radio career, and I was right, as it turned out. So
when you first came to CHUM, who were the characters who were there at the time? Pete Griffin, I guess, would have been there.
Pete and Geets were there. David Pritchard was still there. Chuck Azzarello in the afternoon, and Don Schaefer was doing evenings. And I'll never forget, Duff Roman hired me. And I had been flown up for an interview for a day. And when Duff was driving me back to the airport, Don was on the air, and we're listening in Duff's car, and I hear Schaefer's pipes, and I go, I'm going to follow this guy? Because he was just like Schaefer in the box sort of thing, But they were all great people. Tim Thomas was there, Brian Master, Benji Karsh. Benji picked me up from the airport the day I flew in for that interview, and he didn't know what I looked like, but when he saw me, I was dressed, I think, like in a plaid sport coat and double knit pants and cowboy boots or something like that. And he saw me and he went, yeah, that's the guy. That's the kid from Wisconsin, right? So, yeah, but anyway, great people to learn from and to be around. So I did 10 to 2 at night. Steve Moore was doing overnights at that point. And I did 10 to 2 and then moved up into the evening slot when people started moving around. David Pritchard left. But yeah, I was really fortunate to be able to work with those people who were the pioneers at CHUM-FM. I missed working with David Marsden. He had left the year earlier, I believe. But those other guys were just so good at what they did and so passionate about it.
Music the same when you left as when you first got there? How much difference was there in formatically?
The music changed, I don't know how many times. I mean, when I started, we were still picking our own music, and we were still playing albums and the odd 45 or whatever, but we were still picking our own music, except for a couple of tunes an hour that were coming from the Chum charts or whatever that they were formatting in. And otherwise you had, within certain parameters, you had the run of the library. You had your choice as to what you wanted to play. And then things changed. They went to, I don't know if you recall, the all album format where they would play 20 minutes worth of tracks from a certain album or 20 minutes worth of tracks from a certain artist. And it was at that point that the control of the music got taken out of our hands. And then we got into the Rock Wars with you guys, with
Yeah.
Q. Yeah. And that was fun, actually, because I mean, it was like flamethrower radio, and I loved it,
Mhm.
And then CFNY came along, and so
And
we
that was a
tried to.
totally different ball of wax, really, comparatively speaking, to what Q and CHUM-FM were doing at the
What
time.
was that? Sorry,
But it
Ted.
was something new. It had to be new. It had to be different than what either you guys were doing or what we were doing. But otherwise, it would have never. Wouldn't have lasted a month.
No, I know. And there were so many, like the early days of Q when you guys went on the air too. There was so much great talent there. John Donaby was a part of it. And then I got to work with John later, rest his soul. So sorry to hear about John passing recently. And yeah, I mean, when I think back on it and think back on the people that I worked with, and to get back to your original question, where we went with the music then after the kind of CFNY experiment, trying to kind of work in some quote unquote new wave acts into the playlist, then they finally decided, you know what, we're going to do something that nobody else is doing. And it became hot AC radio, basically. But that also meant more of a pop sound to the station and whatnot. I mean, even that was probably within a 10-year span from the time that I started in 75. So to the mid 80s when all of a sudden we were playing Lionel Richie, Ghostbusters, and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
I was going to say, so at one point, I mean, you were so diametrically opposed in terms of musical taste with your neighbors, Chum AM, then all of a sudden you started crossing over a little bit, and suddenly they were closer to you than just one wall or two walls. It was like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Well,
And
it was, yeah, it was, you know what? It was an interesting experience because it meant I had to be adaptable in terms of my on-air style, which
yeah,
I didn't always get at the time. But by the same token, it also helped me, first of all, in the longevity that I had on air with the station, for 19 years, and also just as a performer, as an entertainer, as a whatever, to be able to if you had to tighten your brakes a little bit, but you still had to get the idea of the information across or whatever, as opposed to rambling on, which I'm doing, it made me long run.
it's interesting. People, if you don't know the history, you might not realize, but at one point, it was the AM station that supported the FM station. Chum
That's
AM
right.
was the big money maker. It was huge. It was
Yeah.
massive, right? And
Right.
they were basically supporting this FM station, which was still kind of a new, kind of an idea, sort of, in the minds of a lot of people. Until one day, suddenly the balance started to go the other way, and then all of a sudden the AM station was being supported by the FM station, and now you're the king of the castle and they're the turds. What kind of a shift in attitude will pervade at that point within the building? Like, could you tell that things were getting different, and guys were getting treated a little bit better in the FM side than the AM side? Or
I don't think it was a matter of being treated better. I think it was just, it was a matter of, everything that you just talked about. The shift in the popularity balance was, I think, for the AM guys and for the management of the AM station, especially, it was just a matter of, what are we going to do? Because, we're getting out popped by our FM side now, basically. And so it was a matter of, I think they had to go through a lot of searching, a lot of formatic adjustments and everything. How long could they keep playing music? When did they become all oldies? And then, then they finally gave it up altogether and went sports and the team radio network and all that kind of stuff. But within the building, you know what? There wasn't really, to my way of thinking, there wasn't really a rivalry that way. When I first started off and I was doing that late night shift, as a guy who grew up listening to WLS and the great top 40 jocks of that station, I was enamored of the AM side. And I would go in, let's say at 2 a.m, and John Major was doing all nights on Chum at that point, and I would go and sit in with him in the booth and watch him do his thing because I had nothing better to do. I had, just gotten into Toronto or whatever, but I was more in awe of those guys than anything else, and a little bit intimidated by some of them just because they were so good at what they did. But by the same token, I don't, you know, there was there's always been an expression that you were a Chum person or you weren't. And that went through the entire halls, basically. That went through the entire building. It didn't matter if you were on the AM side or the FM side, or if you were in sales or engineering or promotions or whatever. You were a Chum person or you weren't, basically. And most people that came into that building stayed in the building. There was the odd exception, but for the most part, you left your ego at the door. And so any kind of shift in the balance of popularity and dollars, let's face it, advertising dollars, really, it wasn't a matter of a rivalry, I guess, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, it does. It does make sense to me, but you can see how a rivalry and a lot of it has to do. And I never worked for the Waters family, but I've heard nothing but positive things about Mr. Waters and the sons and how they managed to keep everybody sort of more even keeled and there was always a good buzz about the place. Like you never heard dirt about Chum on the street.
No.
You hear about some of the other stations where you hear like, oh, there's some weird stuff going on over there, and what's going. I mean, you hear that every day now, but everything's a lot different now, isn't it? But it was always a positive thing. So I guess they managed to keep the family in balance, as it were.
Very, very much. I feel so fortunate. And those of us who worked in the big house, as we called it back then at 1331 Yonge, felt so fortunate to have been a part of that dynasty in radio with Alan Waters and with Jim and with Ron, although he took care of the TV side more than anything. But they always made you feel like family and they treated people well. And yeah, so I that filtered down. It was, they say a fish rots from the head down when things are bad, but by the same token, the positive influence that the Waters family had on each and every employee that worked for them anywhere in the country. I mean, the stories about Mr. and Mrs. Waters trying to attend as many Christmas parties at the various Chum properties as they could, basically, and doing a pretty good job of remembering people's names and everything. But it was just, yeah, you weren't just a number. That's for sure. It was a very personal touch.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
When the day came for you to part ways with the Chum organization, how did that come about and what was that like?
Well, there was two stages. First of all, there was parting ways with CHUM-FM, with the Chum building in Toronto. And then there was part two was departing from the company itself. Part one was when my boss at the time, Ross Davies, had said, so, what do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? And I'm going, I don't know. I see myself doing what I'm doing now. I'm doing afternoon drive on one of the best radio stations in the country right now. Why would I want to do anything else? And he was just like, well, you might want to think about it. In other words, it wasn't going to be an open-ended career doing that, basically.
Yeah.
So as a result, I started to transition into management, and then that was part one of leaving CHUM, was leaving Toronto and going to work for the CHUM stations in Peterborough and being the operations manager there.
That was CKTB, and what was the FM?
The FM was Country 105 and CKPT 1420. Yeah.
I worked.
And
See, and I worked at Checks. That was
oh,
my
did you?
that was my second job. Yeah, in
Okay.
the AM station. Yeah, there you go. So we're closer than we might even want.
I know. Well, you know what? People, our
Yeah,
paths just intersect
it's true.
so much in one way or the other. Yeah, so in '95, I left and went up to Peterborough and did that for about 11 more years.
Yeah.
And it was at that point, and by that time, we had also absorbed the CKLY and Lindsay.
Hmm.
And so I was operations guy for all three. Plus, I was doing mornings on the Lindsay station at that point, and it was a lot. And then it all kind of coincided that in 2006, the Waters family sold the company to CTV, and I also went through some personal stuff that kind of had me reevaluating what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go with my life and all that kind of thing. And also knowing that I was about 30 years with the company and wasn't sure how, a bigger company like CTV was going to treat people like me and whatever. So I took a package. So that was part two of leaving.
Yeah.
And I didn't really want to do it, but it was just, like I said, it was a matter of kind of a confluence of things, both personally and professionally, that kind of pushed me in that direction.
During the time that you were in both Peterborough and in Toronto, were you doing any acting at all?
No, I wasn't actually. Well, I shouldn't say that. When I was in Toronto still, I was doing some commercials and a little bit of voiceover work, but not much. But doing the cattle calls for TV commercials and stuff. Did a beer commercial, did a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial, did a Canadian Tire commercial, that kind of stuff. But that wasn't really acting as far as I was concerned. It wasn't until I got up to Owen Sound and got involved with the community theater group here that I stretched my legs again when it came to what I'd been studying in university and really had a passion for. So, yeah.
Talk to me about community theater, because I find that quite fascinating, because it's like, for some people they think, well, this is just a like kind of a hobby thing, and in reality it's a deep ingrained passion for people. It's not just, well, I think I'll do this because I got a bad back, I can't play golf anymore and I need to do something with my spare time. It's in the gut.
Yeah, it is, and people have different reasons for getting involved in a group like Owen Sound Little Theater, but the passion for performing, for creating, and for being part of a really neat group of volunteers is really what it's all about. Like I say, everybody's reason is different. For me, it was like I had acted in university, and I had seen Owen Sound Little Theater. I think it was in 2013, stage Les Miserables. And I'm thought, you know what, if this little community group can pull this off, and they did a very good job of Les Mis, I thought I'd like to get involved with these guys. And a couple of years later, I did. But I think that's one of the powerful things about community theater groups is that it is all volunteer. Owen Sound Little Theater has 4 or 5 paid staff, full or part-time paid staff, but that's it. Otherwise, everything else that is done on a volunteer basis. And OSLT is really unique in that they own their own theater. They own the Roxy Theater. They bought it about the mid 80s, I think they bought it and converted it from an old movie theater. And a number of years ago, burned the mortgage on it. I mean, there's not too many community theater groups that own their own 400-seat soft seat theater
No.
and
Okay.
keep it going, including during the pandemic. So.
Yeah, and talk about making things happen that seem almost impossible. Here you are, you're working for Bayshore Broadcasting now. You're involved in what, 3 different radio stations?
4, actually.
4, yeah, 4, yeah, counting especially the weekend show, right? So
And a specialty weekend show, yeah.
here you go. So now you're doing this, and I realize that you're not working with the theater group all the time, but you do do that on occasion. How do you juggle all of that?
Well, it's one of the reasons I'll only usually do act in one show a season. There are some people who are retired and who have a lot of time, and they are constantly involved with OSLT, either backstage or on stage or as a part of the board of directors or whatever. For me, it's because when you commit to act in a show, you're committing to usually about 3 months worth of rehearsals before
Mhm.
you actually stage the show over a couple of weeks. So it's a big commitment, but that's one of the reasons that I'll only usually do one show a season, have only ever done one show a season because it is a big commitment.
And what have you done that we would be familiar with?
Well, not the actual productions. I don't think you'd be familiar with anything. The productions were, my first one was In the Mousetrap, of course, the longest running play I think ever.
Yeah.
Agatha Christie. The next, I got to play General Waverly in White Christmas. Got to actually sing a little bit, and then I was in a comedy, a 4-person comedy called The Long Weekend, written by a great Canadian playwright named Norm Foster, and that was a ton of fun. That was just so much fun, and I kind of really found my comedic side, I think, with that show especially. And then I was in a different sort of show written by a Newfoundland playwright called West Moon, that is basically about spirits in a Newfoundland graveyard who come to life once a year on All Souls Night. And they get this short time to kind of get caught up on each other's lives and find out who's new in the graveyard and all that kind of thing. A different sort of show. And that was the last one that I participated in before COVID. And then recently, the last show that I just finished up doing was called Prelude to a Kiss, about a young couple. It was actually a movie that Meg Ryan and Alec Baldwin were in the 80s. And it's about a young couple that fall quickly in love and get married quickly. And then an old man happens upon the wedding and wants to kiss the bride. And when they do, their souls exchange. And then, it's a matter of trying to figure out what to do from there. So I got to play the bride's father in that one. Yeah, so 5 shows in 10 years. I've been really, really lucky, to be a part of this great theater group.
Talk about your time teaching at Humber College.
I only did one semester at Humber in a postgrad class in early 2017, and it was a great experience. It was mostly to do with spoken word content, and so we touched on podcasts and things like that because they were just starting to come to the fore at that point. And these people all had the basic radio training and everything. So, and it was a really sharp group. There were 16 of them, and we referred to them as the Sweet 16 because you could tell that they were fairly exceptional. And I'm proud to say, well, not that I have to do with it, but one of them is hosting the afternoon show on CBC in Toronto right now, Ramraj. Another one is on a rock station. I think it's Q107 out in Calgary. And another one's working for CBC in Edmonton. And anyway, but just a great experience because when you have to kind of break it down as to what comprises radio or broadcasting or podcasting or communication generally, then you have to kind of look at it a little closer from your own perspective. What was second nature has become second nature for you, and when you have to explain it to somebody else, there's a learning curve in that for you as an instructor as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was really, really sorry to hear about Humber canceling
Well,
their program.
I was going to say that. That was just the next question I was about to ask you was like, some people I've heard them say it's like, they take it about it like personally, like it's like a kick in the gut. It's like, what are you doing here? I mean, we can see what's happening with the industry. The industry is changing, but now that you're shutting down the factories that are building those people who will be responsible for the industry to continue, you're all you're doing is you're helping somebody to commit suicide, and I suppose, and if you want to look at it that way, not that the industry is doing that to themselves, but it almost feels like it is based
Yeah,
on
it's it.
the
I mean, the program started back in '72 by Phil Stone, the former CHUM
yeah,
guy. And
right,
like I just did the one semester in the postgrad program, but was, proud to have had a small part to play in that, and they shut down the postgrad program a couple of years ago already. But the irony, Ted, I think to me is that even though radio has kind of shot itself in the foot in the last few years because of consolidation, because of the larger companies owning so much of the market and so many stations and whatever, the irony is that stations like Bell have sold off some of their smaller market properties to some really good operators, like Durham Radio is taking over Peterborough and Lindsay. Moses Znaimer actually is taking over the station in Owen Sound that's our competition.
Right.
And they just flipped this past week, as a matter of fact, to the Zoomer format. So, and I can't speak for Zoomer in terms of their staffing levels, but I know for a fact that they've already posted, Durham Radio has already posted to expand the staff of the radio stations in Peterborough and Lindsay, which were running really, really tight, really, on a shoestring, if you will. So there's the irony is
Well,
that
that's
they're
why
going to start hiring people again, and now the programs aren't there to draw from.
Well, that was my point was like, why would you be doing that at the point where it's just because the corporations are shutting it down, it doesn't mean the radios are going away. And even if it's not a radio, I mean, who knows what the actual piece of machinery will look like in 20 years from now that people are hearing other people's voices. But whatever it is, there will still be those voices. It's like people saying, don't go into journalism because there's not going to be any newspapers around. Well, there may not be a physical piece of paper that you hold and purchase from a box, but somebody has to, if somebody's responsible for creating content that will be read somewhere, somehow. So
Exactly.
why would Humber or Seneca or Centennial College, any of these colleges, shut down portions or all of their programs? I mean, podcasts exist now. I mean, it's like a million podcasts. People have to learn how to do these things. It just doesn't happen.
I think, there's more at play than just the state of the radio, of the broadcast industry at this point. There's obviously funding problems involved. There's obviously numbers have been dwindling for a long, long time. When I worked in Peterborough, I was on the advisory board at Loyalist College, which is another great broadcast school, and they had to basically shut theirs down as well. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of interest, I guess, on the part of people coming out of high school and whatever. And so it's multifaceted. There's more than one reason for it, I think, funding from the provincial government and all that kind of stuff too. So, but it's just, it's just a sad situation that the institutions that would feed the next generation of broadcasters, like Humber had, a Strombo, George Strombolopoulos came out of there. And I can't remember if it was Roz or Mocha from Roz and Mocha. And, there's a number of great people, yourself as well, who came out of Humber,
Actually, I went to Seneca, but it was
Seneca, sorry. Yes.
same diff, right? I mean, it's like, and yeah, I can understand when the numbers start dwindling, you think to yourself, we can't afford to hire professors, lecturers, etc. if we're only going to have 15 kids in a classroom. So then what you do is you pare it down, right? You cut some things and you keep other things, and you don't just sort of walk away from the whole concept and say this doesn't work anymore.
Well, I think I think that's what Seneca's doing right now, and I think that's what all the broadcast schools that still have programs are doing is reevaluating what they can offer, what they should offer, and taking it from there. But yeah, like you say, for Humber to just completely close it all down and say, okay, this year's first years are going to be the last graduating class of this program is like, so
yeah, I know.
anyway,
Kind of like Elon Musk just decided to take over the educational system.
huh? Don't
Yeah.
get me going.
No, I don't want to get you going on that. I don't want to get you going. Do you see yourself staying around radio until it's time to say goodbye to everything? If you know what I'm saying.
You mean, will I die on the radio?
Well, I'm not. I've died many times on the radio. Well, I guess what I'm saying
We
is,
all have. We've all
Yeah.
had those moments. Yeah.
absolutely. I guess what I'm saying, Rick, is that it's for some people, for me anyway, it's something that's in me, and it'll always be in me, whether I do it in podcast form or whether I do it in part-time form or whatever. it's one of those things that it's kind of in you, and it's always there as long as you can do it. I mean, certain things, you can't be a singer for the rest of your life, even if you want to be a good singer, because eventually the voice gets to a point where it says, "No, you can't sing anymore." But radio is the kind of thing that you can do for a long, long time.
Well, it's the question that people ask me all the time. So first of all, they're going, "Well, you're still doing it." I'm going, "Yeah, I am." And then, of course, the next question is, well, so what are your thoughts on retirement? And that includes for my current bosses. They kind of want to have an idea how much longer I might hang in. And like you say, when it's in you, it's in you. And when you've been doing it since you were a teenager and it's all you've really known, it's kind of hard to walk away from it. But for me, I think as long as I can continue to put together coherent thoughts and speak reasonably well on the air and do the job that they're expecting me to do in terms of the sound that I have on any of the various stations that I'm on or whatever. As long as I can do that and they want to pay me, I'll keep doing it, at least for the near future, put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not expecting you to be celebrating your 105th birthday on the air, but
No, I'm not either.
that would be
No.
kind of cool.
At some point, I will have had enough, probably, or they will have had enough of me, or there'll be some young talent they want to move into doing what I do. But at this point, haven't reached that point yet.
Or maybe you'll just move into a seniors long-term care home where they have their own radio station.
Have my own little radio station, little closed circuit radio station. Hey, I've got the mic already. I've got it doesn't take much these days to be able to do it, right? So
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. I'm glad we have finally had the opportunity to do so. I've enjoyed listening to you for years and years, and I remember when Q first went on the air, and I was fortunate to be one of the original day oneers, as it were. Thinking, wow, looking down the street from Young and Bloor down to Young and St. Clair, and thinking, wow, that's a lot of competition down there, man.
it
That's a
was,
talent.
hey, it was a golden time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
I know it's easy to look back on it now and go, oh, well, that was the golden age. But it's true. It's very true compared to what it is now. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. All the best to you, my friend, and good luck with your upcoming move.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a month from now we'll be in our new place and all this will be over and we'll be able to relax a little bit. And thank you so much for asking me to be part of this today, Ted.
Well, no problem. And for both of us, may Green Bay do something this year, the Packers.
Yep.
Yeah, we're both
Here's
Packers.
hoping, right? I wondered if you were going to say, so what are your thoughts on the Packers this year? And I'll say, well, I'll tell you after they've played the Lions, the Bears, and the Vikings once each.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's always the true test, right?
Yeah, it's. Have you been to you've been to Lambeau, haven't you?
I've been to Lambeau once.
You have.
Yeah.
I think I read that on Facebook. And is it the shrine that everybody claims it is?
It is. It's Mecca. It's Mecca for Packers fans, and it's just such a cool thing that the Packers are the only publicly owned football team in the NFL, And for me, because of where I grew up, I'll always be a Packers fan, even though I was closer to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the first time I saw in any NFL games, it was in the Twin Cities. Once seeing the Vikings and twice seeing the Packers play there, but it wasn't until 2011, I think, that I finally got to Lambeau with, thanks to the graces of a friend at that point. Yeah, it's a day I'll never forget. So hope to make it back there eventually at some point, but who knows? Yeah.
I'm not one of those people who wants to be there in the middle of January, though, by the way.
You gotta bundle up. But then again, I've had experience going to games in Buffalo too.
Yeah, I have too, and that's why I say that. Then give me Lambeau, but give it to me like in the middle of October, maybe first week of November. That would be fine for me.
Yeah.
Rick, you take care of yourself, and all the best, my friend.
Thank you so much, Ted. You too.
That'll do it for another episode. Thank you all for tuning in, and we appreciate it. Don't forget you can check out some of our past episodes by going to www.tedwoloshyn.ca. Leave your comments and your thoughts and questions as well. And while you're online, fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You can change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.